Friends, at this time we are going to begin the services for Renee Z Pritikin. We thank you for those of you who are joining us here in the chapel today, and for those of you joining us online through Zoom. Officiating today's services will be Rabbi Frederick Reeves from KAM Isaiah Israel Congregation. And as we're about to begin the service, for those of you in the chapel space here, if you have a cell phone or a pager, we would encourage you to take a moment to turn it off or place it in the silent mode.
Shiviti Adonai, Benegdi Tami, Kemimini Ba'alemo, Lachen Samach Libi, Liagel Kavodi, Afbesari, Yishkahon Labetach, Ki elot azov nafshi elisho lo titein chasidecha lirot shachat todieni orach hayim sova semachot et panecha Neimot b'mincha netzach, Shiviti Adonai, Lenegdi Tami, Ki mimini ba'emu. I have set the eternal always before me. God is at my side, I shall not be moved. Therefore does my heart exult and my soul rejoice. My being is secure, for you will not abandon me to death, nor let your faithful ones see destruction. You show me the path of life. Your presence brings fullness of joy. Enduring happiness is your gift. Death has taken our beloved Renee Pritikin. Our friends grieve in their darkened world. In their silence there is lamentation. In their tears there is loneliness. In their sorrow may they find the presence of loving friends. Hear them, God. Be with them. For Renee's love that united us in life and which death cannot sever. For her companionship that was shared along life's path and which continues through the tenderness of memory. For the gifts of her heart and mind that brought us joy and happiness and is now a precious remembrance. For all these and more, we give our thanks to God. In this time of grief, we listen to the voice of our sacred scriptures that brings us the ever-new message of God's nearness. It tells us of our kinship with the Creator, in light as in darkness, in joy as in sorrow, in life as in death. I invite you to join together with me as we recite the 23rd Psalm. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil. My cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. In his sorrow, Job cried out, God is given, God is taken away. Blessed be the name of God. In ancient people, we are well acquainted with grief and the valley of shadows. Death and sorrow are not strangers to us, yet the centuries have taught us that a good name endures beyond the grave, and that there is strength in faith. With Job, we say, God, you have given. You gave us a loved one who will not be forgotten. For all that was good and enduring in her life, we offer the deepest thanks of our hearts. God, you have taken away. We pray for the strength to turn broken hearts into an altar of trust, before which we acknowledge your sovereignty and love and say, blessed be the name of God, now and forever. We are here to remember Renee Pritikin. Renee was many things: politically minded, a history buff, a good shopper, and very healthy in her lifestyle. But among all of Renee's qualities was also her private side. While she could certainly be outgoing, her essential nature was to focus the attention on another, be it a friend, her daughter, or her grandchildren. She did not want a whole ceremony about herself with all of us talking about her. This is a kind of modesty which Jewish tradition values very highly. But it is also a mitzvah to accompany the dead for burial and to give a eulogy. So how do we balance two mitzvot pushing us in two different directions? We give short eulogies. Renee was born on April 6th here in Chicago in a year that will herein remain unmentioned. That was a sore spot for her, and the thought that people might know her age is something, that's a bridge we're not going to cross at this moment. She was an only child, her father being from Chicago and her mother being from Russia. The family was in a good financial position, and in addition to being able to winter in Florida, they were also able to help out their extended family. And they were also quite traditionally religious, at least they were, until Renee's grandmother died, when Renee was around 9 years old. And when that happened, the family's religious practice changed, and they became members of what was then Isaiah Israel, where Renee was confirmed. After high school, Renee attended journalism school at Northwestern University, and although she didn't work as a journalist, the studies exposed her to the world of politics, which she loved and became very involved in. As involved as she was, she could feel a certain ceiling to what she could achieve, not a glass ceiling because she was a woman, but a ceiling because she needed more schooling. After living in the political world for a number of years, she attended Northwestern's law school, the only woman in her graduating class of 1959, after which she became corporate counsel for the city of Chicago. Renee was still traveling to Florida for vacations, and on one of these trips, she met the sister of Stanley Königsberg, who was also on vacation, but from New York. Not too long after, Renee happened to be in New York, and they arranged to meet for lunch. But instead, Stanley was there. It must have been an incredible lunch, I have to say, because after that, Stanley started coming to Chicago off and on. And then they were married, and Renee moved to New York. When she first arrived, Renee felt the lack of the kind of network that she'd spent so long developing in Chicago. She tried to work at different law firms, and as the old adage in Chicago goes, they didn't want nobody that nobody sent. Plus, here, the glass ceiling of being a woman in a man's world did get in her way. Renee, however, did have that private side, so she was not overly driven to break through. And she had a very happy life with Stanley on the East Side, developing a happy lifestyle, going shopping. Many hats were purchased, I understand. Also, she did become busy when Ree was born. And she developed a happy life in New York as a wife and a mother. Unfortunately, when Ree was in law school, her father was diagnosed with a brain tumor. Although he would not succumb to it for another 15 years, the difficulties of the illness and other disruptive forces in the family pulled them apart, and Renee and Stanley divorced. Renee was in the position of needing to start over. And start over she did. She moved back to Chicago and was able to reactivate the network that she had before she left, getting a job in the Cook County court system. Cook County, excuse me. She worked there from age 66 to 81, although I won't say what years she was those ages. One of the great joys of her life in Chicago was that she was able to spend so much time with her daughter and grandchildren, always wanting to know what Spencer was doing, what Shayna was up to, and how she could be involved in their lives. Now, Ree, Brian, and Shayna are going to speak, so I'm not going to put words into their mouths, but in hearing them talk about Renee, the love and real affection that they feel comes through so very strongly. Did you all decide what order you wish to speak? Brian first. We'll welcome Brian to the left.
In the 24 and a half years that I knew Renee, I can count on one hand the number of times I saw her without her trademark hat. It was like seeing Batman without his mask, Superman without his cape. Last week, Ree, Shane, and I met with the rabbi, and Rabbi Reeves said to me, "Brian, you haven't said much. How would you describe your relationship with Renee?" And I did so in one word, and that word was
Complicated.
complicated. I used to say that I was Renee's favorite son-in-law. She didn't find that very funny. She didn't find me very funny. In fact, she's probably rolling over in her casket right now. I realized I wasn't her favorite person. Renee lived for Ree and her 2 grandkids. She just tolerated me. We had a complicated relationship in that we were butting heads from the beginning until we figured out that it was best, just like 2 boxers were sent to neutral corners, we stayed in our neutral corners. Ree once explained to me that Renee felt that nobody was good enough for Ree. I'm not here to argue with that. When you marry somebody with the tenacity, toughness, determination, and smarts, combined with empathy, kindness, and dedication, the bar is very high. And when you marry somebody who's the cross between Golda Meir and Mother Teresa, the bar is really, really high. Renee gave me 2 compliments during my life, or during her life. Number 1, she said she was glad I was Jewish. I responded that I was glad she was Jewish. And number 2, she told me that I was tall. I think from her vantage point, I was. And I assumed that was a compliment. I can sum up Renee in a few words. She was whip smart, curious, generous, quirky, stubborn, and proud. The fact was, Renee was a trailblazer. She was an avid reader, a Civil War buff. She loved to go to movies and plays. Rabbi mentioned Renee's shopping, and often she was most of the time shopping for Ree, Renee, and Spencer. But I was sometimes the beneficiary of that shopping. The tie you see me wearing now was a gift from Renee. In fact, every single tie that I own that's a decent tie is a gift from Renee. Every dress shirt, every sweater that I own that is halfway decent was a gift from Renee. Whenever somebody complimented me on my outfit, my response was, and always will be, my mother-in-law dresses me well. Renee's love for Ree and Spencer and Shayna was palpable. And she also had a had a true love for our dog, Moxie. She called Moxie her grand dog. Our current dogs, Blue and Sawyer, she just tolerated. It was a tradition pre-COVID that we would go to Renee's condo almost every Friday and go swimming at her building's pool. And afterwards we would have pizza in her condo. Annually, she would take us to the magnificent Mile Lights Parade, and she would make a reservation at the Drake on the second floor, and it overlooked the Michigan Avenue. And Renee would get such a kick out of watching the kids be so happy. And I got such a kick out of the all-you-can-eat dinner buffet at the Drake. Renee took us to a bunch of shows that ranged from Yo Gabba Gabba to Don Rickles to the annual Northwestern WAMU Variety Show. Although her and Ree and Shayna went on a bunch of girls' trips, she did come on vacation a couple of times with us. Once to Kentucky, we went to Louisville and Lexington, and once to Indianapolis. I'll never forget the night in Indianapolis. There was a small park in front of the hotel, and Shayna and Spencer were riding their scooters. As usual, Spencer was squealing like a pig, and Shayna was laughing, and Renee turned to me and said, "This is the best night of my life." Reed once told me that she couldn't have picked a nicer mother if she tried. I know Shayna and Spencer can say the same. Everybody wants a guardian angel. Renee actually had a guardian angel. His name was Dr. Jeffrey Trunsky, and Renee was one of his first patients at Northwestern. She saw him for 25 years, and Renee often credits Dr. Trunsky for keeping Renee alive so long. I talked to Dr. Trunsky recently, and we were talking about Renee's quirkiness, and he told me that the first 9 years that he saw Renee, she wouldn't let him do a physical exam on her. And also the first 9 years that he saw Renee, she wouldn't tell him how old she was. Of course, every year, Renee, she would get Christmas presents for Dr. Trunsky's kids. I want to give a couple of shout outs here. A shout out to Cousin Benet. First of all, thank you for being so nice to my kids. You were Renee's travel buddy, fellow history buff, partner in crime, and likely her best friend. Cousin Donna, you came in a few weeks ago when you heard Renee wasn't doing well. You left your family on vacation in South Carolina to come in for the day. That was a true mitzvah. And also a reminder, don't wait till tomorrow, because tomorrow may never come. And to Judy Homich and Melissa Durkin, a few years ago, you surprised Renee on her birthday. The smile on her face was priceless, and I'll never forget it. The truth is, I respected Renee. I loved her. I wish I would have told her so. Right after she died, we went to the assisted living place, and I took 2 photos so I can remember her this way. The first photo was of the hats that were lined up on the pegs by the door as you walk in. The second photo was of the 2 books by her bedside. One was a history book, I think it was called Leadership by Doris Kearns Goodwin, and the other, I think, was a history book about the Civil War. She was a Civil War buff. And then I went in the corner and I cried. For someone so little, she was a big presence everywhere she went, and a big presence in my life. I have this little voice in my head right now, and it's Renee saying, "Would you stop talking about me already?" Renee, I tip my virtual cap to you on a life well lived.
How do you express how much you love someone in just a couple minutes? You have no idea how much Baba means to me. The first thing I think of when I think of her is a strong, independent woman that I aspire to be. She was confident, driven, and self-assured. She constantly reminded me that I can do anything I put my mind to, and I don't need any man to tell me what to do. She was my cheerleader in every aspect of my life. Some of my earliest memories of Baba and I are her and I playing together on her floor in her apartment. She used to have a huge bag of different crafts and activities, and we would play with them together for hours. I always admired how good of an artist she was. I have memories of her sitting at the kitchen table or standing by the counter and doodling. She would grab whatever was around her, a pen and often a napkin, and she would freehand these beautiful faces. Baba and I were so similar. We have a love of art, pickles, tap dancing, and we both have a hidden talent of being able to wiggle our ears. We love to go shopping together. Until middle school, I'm pretty sure she bought me almost every item of clothing I owned. Anytime we walked into a department store, she would be greeted by everyone that worked there. People absolutely loved her. She had this amazing talent of being able to talk to anyone, a talent I wish I really had. Everyone knew who she was, and because of her, everyone knew who I was. Shopping and popovers, that was our perfect day. She was also the biggest history buff I know. She was so excited to come to my school when I was in 4th grade to talk about the meaning behind the Chicago flag. I was so proud. She and I both dressed up, and everyone in my class loved her and wrote thank you notes afterwards that she hung in her apartment ever since. I have always been so proud to call Baba my grandmother. Like I said, she exemplifies a strong, independent woman. One of my favorite pictures of her is her law school graduation picture. She's the lone woman standing in a sea of men. It's really an amazing picture. It really exemplifies who she is. She did anything she put her mind to, and she was determined to break the norms of society. She was so proud that I want to become a doctor. She told me just a couple months ago how excited she was to see me graduate medical school. She also reminded me to take care of Spency. Don't worry, Baba, I've got him. I know she would have done anything for us. I love you, Baba. I'm really going to miss you.
My mom didn't think she was pretty. She was always worried about getting fat, and she didn't think she was particularly smart. She's what you would call a pessimist, the glass half empty. She always expected a negative outcome for herself. I never understood why. Maybe it was due to tremendous amount of loss in her life or living through the Depression in World War II. I don't know. Her praise and positivity was all directed at me. As far as she was concerned, I was perfect. I've been asked as an adult, why did I voluntarily spend so much time with her? The answer is easy: love. She bestowed an unending amount of love on me. Who wouldn't want to be around that? My mother repeated many things over and over to me. One of them was, everyone needs a helping hand at some point. I tried to be her helping hand when she needed me most. My mom was actually one of the smartest people I know. I think she literally knew the answer to every question I ever asked her. She was an avid reader. She read every day. Not your fluffy fiction books. She thought those were mostly a waste of time, a waste of her mind. She constantly wanted to learn something new. She also had an unbelievable ability to retain everything she learned. History was her passion, and she threw herself into books about wars and presidents, generals and their soldiers. She especially loved the Civil War and World War II. Her idea of a real vacation was visiting a battlefield with Cousin Benet, or taking Shayna and I to historical sites, mansions of wealthy families, and taking historical tours. She would always be upfront with the tour guide, asking a million questions, and also giving that guide her own history lesson. She would read a book and then be so excited to tell me about what happened on the battlefield or the intel operations or what a specific president did. Sound fun? It was pure torture. I'm not going to lie, I couldn't even pretend to be interested. When I was a child, my mom would make me read the New York Times every day and pick out one article to discuss at the dinner table. Again, torture. I never picked an article based on content. I always picked based on length. I think I tortured her as much as she tortured me. It made her so sad that I had no desire to be her intellectual equivalent. My mother was an only child. She grew up in a house on the south side of Chicago where she lived with her parents and grandparents. Her first language was Yiddish, which is how she communicated with her grandparents. She grew up in a very religious Orthodox home until her grandparents passed away, and then wanting to assimilate, her parents distanced themselves from the traditional practices of Judaism. After her grandparents' passing, they moved to Hyde Park, where she went to school. Girls back then were expected to take cooking and home economics because all that was expected of them was to take care of their home and their husband. My mother refused. She had other plans. She loved to learn and had no interest in sewing or cooking. I think the fact that she couldn't cook was like a badge of honor. My mother was a straight-A student, always. She went to Northwestern University School of Journalism when she was around 17. No one loved to learn more than my mom. She was also very involved in politics, and as a kid told me she knew everyone. She was the executive secretary of the Young Democrats and had her hand in getting most Democrats elected in the mid to late 1950s and early 60s. She would tell me stories of how she would knock on doors in Republican districts and crazy men would scream at her or chase her down the street. She would tell me stories about Mayor Daley, the original Mayor Daley, as she referred to him, Senator Simon and Harold Washington. She considered all of them to be her friend. It wasn't until I started cleaning out her apartment a few months ago that I realized how deeply involved she was. I found photos of her and Daley, senators, congressmen, and judges, newspaper articles about her work, her dedication, and how beautiful she was. She was a true trailblazer. There were not many women in politics at the time. Most of her friends and her connections were men. My mom decided to go to Northwestern Law School about 8 years after college. She was one of less than a handful of women admitted. She told me that the men would not allow her into the lounge, so the few women would hang out in the women's restroom. The male students would tell her that she was taking up space of a man and shouldn't be there. She faced discrimination not only from her peers, but also from her professors. She told me that one professor marked her paper lower because she was a woman, even though it was the best one in the class. Women were not allowed to be editor of law review. That was for a man. There was no one to complain to and nothing to be done about it. She said her happiest day in law school was when one of the boys invited her with the other boys to get coffee. She ended up winning some of them over and becoming the best of friends. When it was time to get a job, my mom tells a story of interviewing with Jenner from the law firm of Jenner and Block. Jenner told her, "We don't want any high heels clicking around here, and we certainly don't want a Jew." It was the times. There were no anti-discrimination laws, nothing she could do, so she took a job with the Corporation Counsel for the city of Chicago. I'm guessing that one of her political friends helped to make it happen. My mom married my dad and moved to Manhattan, where she lived for 30 years. She didn't work while I was growing up. She said she tried, but never found her footing in New York. My parents gave me the happiest childhood imaginable. My friends growing up loved my mom and she them. I have memories of all my friends sitting in the kitchen, she on the stool and they on the counters and the floors, telling her their troubles, and she always providing thoughtful, caring advice. They would leave and say, "Love you, Mama Kay." I was the center of my mom's universe, and she was always there to support me. She was my anchor. After my dad's illness, my mom didn't know what to do. She had no family in New York, no job, and no need to stay, so she decided she wanted to go home, move back to Chicago. I just graduated law school and couldn't imagine being away for her, so I moved too. She called her good friend, Harry Comerford, who was the chief judge of the Circuit Court of Cook County, and asked to see him. She had no income coming in and needed to support herself. She met with Harry and asked for a job. He not only gave her a job as a lawyer, he made her an administrative hearing officer for the Cook County Circuit Court on the spot. He gave me a job as a law clerk. Remember I told you that she was executive secretary of the Young Democrats? She was his executive secretary. His love for her and their friendship transcended time. He gave a 67-year-old woman who hadn't worked in 30 years a prestigious job, no questions asked. And by giving her a job, he saved her life. My mom worked at that job until she was 81 years old, and after having a valve replacement and bypass heart surgery. She retired and became my Monday babysitter for Spencer. I think her favorite job of all was that of Baba to Shayna and Spencer. She called them her little satellites. How blessed she was to have all of us, and how blessed we were to have her. My mom liked to show her love through shopping. She dressed all of us. I got a lot of sweaters and dresses and anything I needed, Brian expensive shirts and ties. I don't think I ever bought a single item of clothing for my kids until Shayna wanted to shop for herself in middle school. Shayna and Spencer, you were Baba's pride and joy. One of her happiest days was coming to Shayna school in 4th grade and giving a history lesson on the meaning of the Chicago flag to her class. I think she prepped for this honor like she was about to speak in front of the Supreme Court. And she was brilliant. The kids were engaged and interested, and Shayna was so proud of her Baba that day. Shayna and Spencer, Baba loves you so much. She would say that Spencer was her sweet little boy, and being his early babysitter, one of her great joys. Shayna, you know that Baba adores you. She was so proud of all of your accomplishments. She would say, Shayna, she's a student. She cares about her work. This was the child I was supposed to have. I would say, sorry, Mommy, you got me, but I gave you Shayna. She wanted more than anything to live, to see you graduate medical school and to be your first patient. Watch you get married and have children. If you were at Northwestern Hospital, she would have visited you every day. She loved spending time with you, and most of all, seeing you grow up into such an accomplished young woman. Even just last week, she said to me, Shayna is just so beautiful and smart. Don't ever forget how special you were to her. Brian, my mom loved you too. She may not have said it enough, but she loved you and she wanted only the best for you. My mom started every phone call with, "How are you, Brian, the kids? And I miss you guys," even if I just saw her a few minutes ago. My mom always told me that I was the best thing that ever happened to her. She would tell me this over and over. In fact, for the past year, whenever she saw me or talked to me, she would tell me how much she loved me and how I was the best thing to ever happen in her life. She knew, as I did, that her days were numbered, but she wanted me to know when she was gone that I was the number one thing she loved most in her life. I was her greatest accomplishment. I do.
Of course, in this short period of time, we could never say all that there is to say about a life as full as Renee's. We've only brushed against the strong friendships that she developed throughout her life. We haven't mentioned her love of old pieces of jewelry, drawings and painting that she did. And as we leave here today, we should remember her modesty, a most Jewish quality, one that, like all Jewish values, exists on a continuum. There can be too much or too little. Renee showed us, by how she lived, a good balance. She was not so modest that you would not notice her, but she knew that she didn't need to be the center of every show, much preferring another to get the spotlight in their time. When we would bring her presence into our lives in the future, we would do well to remember this lesson and to put it into action. Take a few moments for silent prayers. I invite you to please rise. תחת כנפי השכינה, עם קדושים וטהורים, כזהר הרקיע מסירים, את נשמת רחל חי רחל בת ארתבשרה, שהלכה לעולמה. בעל הרחמים יסתיריה בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, בצרור החיים את נשמתה. אדוני הוא נחלתה, ותנוח בשלום על משכבה, ונאמר Amen. Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Renee Pritikin, who has entered eternity. God of mercy, let her find refuge in your eternal presence, and let her soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. God is her inheritance. May she rest in peace. We say together, Amen. You may be seated.
Friends, this concludes the services here in the chapel, and the entombment will continue here in the mausoleum in just a few moments. that the cemetery staff will come in, remove the casket, and prepare it for the entombment. The family will be together for Shiva at Chicago Jewish Funerals at our Skokie Chapel at 8851 Skokie Boulevard today from 5 until 8 p.m. And the family has also requested that any memorial contributions be made to the Soaring Eagle Academy, and that information is also available on our website as well as in the service folders that you received today. At this time, we're going to end the transmission, I believe, for the service. So thank you for those of you joining us online. And we'll just ask everyone to just remain in the chapel for a few minutes as the cemetery staff prepare the casket. Thank you.